what we're talking about today is compliance. How do we measure compliance? How do we identify when things are not going the way we want? And what actions can we take to resolve that? By looking up Webster, just so that we can all get on the same page with what compliance means, it really is the active process of doing what you've been asked or ordered to do. Now, I don't like to use the word ordered, but it is, basically you're setting guidelines in place and wanting your team to follow those guidelines to help you build a successful practice, right? I like to put a PSA or a PS twist on it, and it's really having your team complete expected tasks that support you having a predictable and successful business, right? So the reason that you have guidelines is not that you want people to, follow in the footsteps of soldiers. What you want is people to be able to do things in a predictable way. So when you do your forecasting is pretty close to what you're wanting to see in the system. When you're expecting people to put timesheets in on a weekly or a monthly basis, when that week or month is over, you're expecting to see the time in the system. So it's a lot about expectations and how compliance ensures that those expectations are being met, because you are essentially building a business and running a business. And in order for your business to be successful, a lot of businesses have to be predictable, and predictable relies on standards, consistency, and compliance, of course. Now, some of the most common compliance measures, there's a lot of them out there. A lot of them are more metric-oriented. But if you think in terms of compliance, there's sort of, in my mind, 3 categories of compliance that you want to think about, and how each of those impact your business differently, and how each of those are measured differently, and how are they rolled out differently, essentially, right? So there's the policy area. The policy tends to be more protective or preventative type things like SOX compliance, making sure that you're following the needs of auditors when you come in, so you can pass auditors and maybe keep your accreditation or certifications. But there's also the policies that you put in place that are really for everyone's benefit. Things like making sure that you have some kind of backups for your laptops, or you install antivirus software, those kind of policies that you put in place. And really, those policies are typically, companies start dividing those policies when something has gone wrong, or they're wanting to make sure nothing does go wrong. And they're really in the best interest of not only protecting the company, but protecting the individual. Then there's the management and process area. This is more about how do you do business and how do you make sure that people are doing things in a similar fashion. A company that does not look consistent is a company that does feel like it's in a bit of chaos, and you rely on sort of the power of the individuals to be successful in your organization. So in this area, you have things like methodology, and you have standard operating procedures, and you have checklists, and you have templates, and you have guidelines. And these are all things to help people be successful, by themselves, but also successful in engagement, successful with projects, successful with customers, because you're following something that's been tried and true instead of sort of winging it every time you deal with an engagement. And finally, the easiest thing to measure is the compliance, which is more the tactical stuff, like, did you do this, yes or no, right? Is this on time, yes or no? Typical thing is timesheets, right? Timesheets are a big compliance measure for professional services organizations, most of them, not all of them, but most of them. So, wanting to know what people have worked on and keeping accurate notes or captures of things like trip reports and stuff, that we're getting that information on a regular basis, and it's on a timely basis, because that means things are moving forward in a method that you're expecting. Okay. Also, it's one of those things that the best laid plans, are what you're expecting to happen. So resource scheduling is a big thing. Resource management is a big thing with professional services organizations. And if we're scheduling one thing and we're working on something completely different, that's another level of compliance where you're losing predictability. You're losing, the pulse of the business. So you want to have something in place that you can measure to say, well, how close was I in my scheduling activity, where can I improve so I can continue to evolve as a company. Okay. So if we take each of these in more detail, let's talk about ways to measure and what the impact is to the business if things are not quite either measured or complied with or followed along the way. And the first one, the most important one for many organizations, is the industry policy requirements, things like SOX compliance, things like ISO 9001 certification. Those are things that entire companies base their reputation on, and that's how they get clients and they qualify for, contract awards and stuff, because they do meet those strict policy requirements. And each of those policy requirements have their own set of, here's what you must be able to do or prove or show that the business is doing, that the business is complying with. Right? This is in and of itself for some companies a make or break compliance metric, and that's where you get all your auditors and your certification. So because the impact for businesses that fall into this category is so visible, you'll see a lot of focus on making sure that there are tools in place to show that we are compliant, that you are being measured and you have the reporting and the audit capabilities necessary to prove that you do meet these policies, that you are SOX compliant, that you are following the ISO 9001 standards. Because if you can't show that, if you can't measure that or show that, then the impact could be it becomes a very difficult audit process for you to get through, and you could potentially have a very big negative impact to the business because you could lose a certification. So here is where you start looking at those technical solutions. PSAs play a big part in things like SOX compliance or VSOE, for example, being able to prove that you do follow VSOE. So industry policy requirements do have a lot of compliance, and that's where a lot of PSA and tools and technology get brought into place. Now, along with policies, you could also have internal policies. And like I mentioned, a lot of these internal policies could be more guidelines to protect the individual, to protect the business. Things as simple as making sure you have the latest version of antivirus software on your computer. That is definitely a policy for many companies. It is a requirement. People must comply with that, because if they don't, they run the risk of losing company information or having something impact them personally. So those are more for protection purposes. And so people tend to follow these policies and are compliant with these kind of policies without so much having to be measured, but they understand that there's a benefit to them. And in these cases, for people to follow these kind of policies, you want to highlight where the benefit is to them. And that will drive compliance in many cases. Now, the standard operating procedures in the management and process area, I come from a background of starting out working in government contracting, where the term SOP is quite prevalent, because it's an acronym for one, but also that it's sort of making sure that people are following a strict checklist and a strict guidance on how to make sure that they are going to be able to complete the activity that they need to do. And this falls into, I've seen a lot of companies follow this, where you can sort of establish a PMO, if you want to think of an SOP as a PMO, Project Management Office, where you're defining, okay, so here's how we deliver engagement. We have a kickoff meeting. This kickoff meeting has the following template, and this kickoff meeting must consist of the following things. And you must be able to establish a core team and a steering committee. These are all standard operating procedure type things, and they are twofold. One is to ensure consistency, but also to ensure that you as a company are following something that is repeatable. For those of you who may be familiar with the maturity model, CMM or SEI, this is where SOPs tend to help you gain levels of excellence in that maturity model measurement, because you can prove that you deliver projects in a consistent manner, in a repeatable manner, and that manner is proven to be successful, profitable, customer satisfactory, all those all those things that are for compliance. Now, in order to measure compliance with this type of activity, though, there's usually something that proves that you did something, right? You have a deliverable, or you log a status report, or you have a regular touch point, and that's where you start establishing tools and structures like capturing, maybe there's a document management structure that you make sure you put all of your documents in, and you have someone audit that on a regular basis to make sure that there's a compliance with your standard operating procedures. When it's things like making sure that you're delivering things in a consistent manner, that you're having someone audit that deliverable and make sure that it meets the QA requirements that you have for compliance. Right? So really it's to measure and get compliance with a standard operating procedure, just making sure people understand what is that standard operating procedure. Conducting training for people, and then conducting regular retraining. Just because someone went through project management training course last year does not mean that they remember it, or maybe they have to go through it again and tweak it. So sort of that recertification almost internally. And you really have to hold individuals accountable. When you say, okay, so here's how we do things, you don't give them a document and walk away. You let them know that there will be times where there are audits, that there are reasons why things are being done in this manner, and you also make it about the individual as much as it is about the customer and about the company. So hold people accountable, explain the benefits to them, and make sure you communicate expectations that this standard operating procedure is in place for a very good reason. Now, along with that is methodology, and methodology is something that is probably very close to your heart as a professional services organization. It's how you do business. There's the standard operating procedure, which may be more common across companies, where you're things like you have a kickoff meeting, you have a closeout call, and you deliver something in the middle. But the methodology and how you deliver that might be unique to you, unique to your organization. And that also needs to be complied with, because if people start doing things in a different manner, that means that you're not necessarily being consistent as a company. And the reason that you put the methodology in place is that highlights your unique skill set or your unique approach as a business. And here's where you get a little bit, it crosses the line a little bit more into tactical activities, where you're giving people the tools they need. Not necessarily a timesheet tool, but it might be more like things like a template or a status report format that here's what I need to make sure that you're on top of. And if you're able to deliver this in a consistent manner to the customer, then we know that you are following our methodology, that you're keeping on top of the budget, that you're making sure that the risks are closing before they become issues, and that you have a consistent way to deliver the information. So standard operating procedure and methodology tend to go hand in hand when you're talking about sort of being consistent and being compliant with the consistency in the organization. Now, how do you get people to follow your methodology? Well, you do have to train them on it. You define it, make sure it's very clear and concise, deliver that training, and emphasize that training on a regular basis. Maybe there's annual re-ups, recertifications that you do internally, for example. And a lot of companies that give out certifications have this type of approach. They want to make sure that you're keeping up on the latest changes, tweaks, whether it's technology, whether it's business process, or whether it's templates. You want to make sure that that training is being done and you're doing some audits to keep track of that compliance. Now, audits can be in the form of, we're just looking for deliverables, we're looking for templates, we're looking for formats, and we're doing a sort of a grading scale. It could be maybe there's a survey that happens. So audits can happen in various formats. So really what we want to make sure is whatever the audits are covering to make sure that you're compliant, you have to also keep in mind that a defined methodology may not be a one-size-fits-all. Make sure the methodology accommodates the fact that if you have a 2-day engagement versus a 2-year engagement, obviously the deliverable structure of the 2-day engagement is extremely different than a 2-year engagement. The amount of administration that you want to do for a 2-day engagement should be very, very small but still ensure that there is quality and that there is compliance with what is expected in a 2-day engagement versus a 2-year engagement. So standard operating procedure, here's what we always do, methodology, here's what we deliver and how we deliver it, training in both areas, and audits for compliance, making sure we keep in mind that the more admin we structure on people, the harder it will be for them to be compliant. And finally, the tactical stuff. So the tactical stuff, this is where everyone has a compliance measure almost, because timesheets, for example, are the lifeblood of many PS organizations. If you don't know what you work on, you don't know what to bill. So here you definitely want to put very clear guidance. This is here's what we're doing and why we're doing it. Not so much when we talk about methodology and process, that's more of a here's guidance. You want to make sure you do this type of deliverable, but the content of the deliverable obviously is going to be dependent on the engagement. In the timesheet world, the timesheet is more black and white. You need to put a weekly timesheet in, and it needs to be at least 40 hours, for example. Okay? So here the guidelines are much more measurable because they are very defined deadlines, very defined cutoffs, very defined direction. Not so much guidelines, but this is what you have to do to ensure that you're reporting things correctly. So here the compliance is, because you can measure it, this is where it becomes very, very easy to measure this with a tool. And for those of you who have a PSA tool or a timesheet system, this, of course, is something that there's a standard report that you're probably using that says, well, if somebody submitted it, did they submit it on time? If they submitted it, are they waiting for an approver? Did the approver do it on time? So you're doing a lot of just tangible audits because the data is available and it's very measurable. It's very objective at the end of the day. Now, measuring compliance with timesheets could be baked into your annual performance review. So this is something that the individuals can control themselves. Following standard operating procedure, following methodology, that all is can be somewhat subjective because it changes depending on the type of engagement. But a timesheet is a timesheet. You should always get a timesheet in, right? If you're a timesheet type organization. So this is under the control of the individual. This is something that if there's guidance given to them on if you can't figure out what to put on your timesheet, talk to this person. But the compliance of getting your timesheets in, because it is important to many PS organizations, it can be something that you put into the annual performance review. And it should be one of those easy A's. For those of you who went through some kind of higher ed course or place, there's always a class that seemed to be the easy A class. This would be one of those, right? The timesheet compliance should be an easy A for someone on their performance review, because the more compliant you have of timesheet entry, the more predictable your business is going to be. And you don't have to worry about chasing people down and lags and time delays and invoice delays and all that kind of stuff. The timesheet status should be pretty much a no-brainer. The other tactical one is your scheduling versus plan. So this one, this is where the forecasting aspect comes into play. When you're forecasting in an organization like services, you're forecasting on or predicting what's going to happen. Okay, that may not always happen, but the more accurate you can be, the more accurate your forecast, the more predictable your success is going to be. If you're not able to measure what it is you're expecting to work, then you have a hard time predicting what's going to be working in the future. So like the diagrams I have on the slide here, there's the perfect plan, and then there's how you actually got to that place. And you may have had a lot of curveballs along the way, but that happens. And the fact that you capture it from an actuals and can use that to feed in to figure out, okay, what did I do wrong, and improve upon that scheduling, then you can get more of the expected and the actuals looking very similar. We work with customers many times where they're implementing a resource scheduling methodology. When you implement that, the first few months or the first couple of weeks, they're difficult because if you haven't measured it before, it's hard to start measuring something and know what to expect because things start happening, things change. But the more data you gather, the more trending information you can get, the more you can predict what's going to happen. And then if people are compliant with their timesheets, you can then measure your plan versus your actual. You can measure how compliant people are with working on what the plans are. Now, a great example of, well, why would this be a compliance? Why is this even in my slide deck, right? It's really that last topic, that last bullet point. And that is the rogue request. The, hey, you know what, could you just pick this up for me for 2 hours? And then what you end up finding out is people are working on stuff that is not a priority. They're not working on your key accounts. They're not meeting the deadlines that you expect because they're trying to please too many people or they're trying to work on too many things. Or you find out that you're not communicating clearly and you're not setting expectations that this is a priority and this is why it's a priority. Right? A lot of companies want to empower their individuals to be able to manage their own workload, to pick up billable work and to help others, which is fabulous. It's great, but empowerment has to be balanced nicely with priority. And control and empowerment oftentimes are a delicate balance because you want your individuals to be able to manage their own workload, but there's a reason there's a plan in place. There's a reason that people have priorities, and you want to be able to make sure that you're able to measure, did my plan get executed, and if it didn't get executed, why is it not being executed, so that you can make corrective action and then continue to measure that compliance with, now people are following my plan. They may still pick up a side project, side thing, so as long as the plan is being executed, I know there's compliance, and now I can be a predictable organization. So what happens if you're not compliant? What happens, there's the catastrophic things where you lose like an ISO 9001 certification, which could be very critical to your business. But there's other things like to the business, if you can't measure compliance and make sure people are compliant, you lose that predictable success factor. Now you feel like, okay, so I tried this, it didn't work. Well, let me try something else, it didn't work. It feels very much like, well, there isn't a plan in place. So you definitely want to make sure you have that predictability internally, and that compliance helps get you there. When you measure compliance, you know expectations are being met. When you start not being predictable, then you start losing credibility. Maybe you're selling something and you can't deliver on it, or you're promising something and you can't follow through. And when that starts happening, then there could be literally a loss of identity as a company, because although you may tout yourself as the best XYZ, that credibility and that damage to your reputation not being able to be predictable means that you can't really claim that anymore, and you have a lot of customer satisfaction issues, right? So compliance is actually sort of a good route to build that business up from, and without compliance, you do have more chaos going on in the organization. But to the individual, chaos actually could be a negative. Some people thrive in chaos. I think there's always a handful of those in the organization, but for the most part, people want to understand that they're doing a good job, that they know what they're supposed to be working on, and that they're accomplishing what it is they're meant to do, and they're enjoying their job. They were hired to do something, and they're able to deliver on that. When there's a lack of compliance or a lack of compliance importance, people get frustrated because they may be doing a good job and no one's recognizing that, or you're trying to drive the company down a path, but the company wants to go into a different path, and so the lack of compliance causes frustration or confusion, and there might be a lack of faith in the leadership because of the lack of direction that's being brought down. So compliance is actually one of those core competencies. People do it probably without thinking about it because you're like, well, of course we're going to deliver it this way. But that's actually a level of compliance to make sure that the company is predictable. So in general, professional services organizations are dependent on people. But people need a way to understand what it is that is expected of them, what are they responsible for, what are they empowered to do. And with that, gives them the ability to execute on that. And that execution is what you should be able to rely on for predictability. establishing those guidelines, making sure you have audits in place to make sure that the training is followed and sticks, and that you hold people accountable to be able to be compliant with the policies that you have in place.